I think that it's not actually about the hardware, it's about the training pipeline is probably in the autumn. So let's say October. And the reason for that is normally the training pipeline for an F-16 pilot is 18 months. They've done some recent tests and found that they can do it, they can compress it if you strip everything out in 4 or 5 months. And so that's why I think we're looking at the autumn as the earliest.
Okay, so what difference would F-16 fighter jets make in Ukraine? I mean, President Zelensky has been pushing for jets for a long time, hasn't he? What difference on the ground would they make?
So it's important to note that Russia failed to gain air superiority in this war. And so the airspace is contested. Both sides have air forces and jets and helicopters. But what the F-16 does is it massively boosts Ukraine's air force in numbers and also in the quality of the jets. And specifically what they'll be using these jets for is to strike Russian targets in the rear. So it's a bit like the recent Storm Shadow cruise missiles that the UK has provided. What they allow Ukraine to do is to hit logistics, command and control, all those important things that you need in warfare, but well behind the Russian lines, so hundreds of kilometers behind the Russian lines. And so we'll start to see a lot more of that as we go into the autumn.
And you think, from what you're saying, that this could make a significant difference in the direction that this conflict is taking?
I think it's an extra layer. I'm very wary to say this piece of technology will be a game changer. Everything is hailed as a game changer. But what I think this does is it continues to keep the pressure on Russia, and it continues incrementally to increase Ukraine's capability. And that's really what we've been doing over the last year, degrading Russia's ability to fight war and incrementally increasing Ukraine's ability to fight war.
Mike, thanks so much for that. That's Mike Martin from King's College London.
Thank you.
The M1 Abrams entered service in 1980, a fast, heavily armoured tank with the very latest technologies to give it every advantage on the battlefield. First seen action in Operation Desert Storm, the plain, arid camouflage tank gained a reputation quickly in the barren deserts of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Powered by a high-speed turbine engine, the M1 raced across this difficult terrain to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi occupation. The German-designed 120mm smoothbore cannon had longer range, more accurate fire, and more advanced ammunition. It easily dispatched the lower-tech Soviet-supplied tanks of the Iraqi army. Sometime this year, it's expected that the US will deliver a battalion of 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine to once again face off against the Soviet tanks it was designed to battle. The Ukrainian army will need training to maintain and operate these new tanks because they are like no other tank. And although this tank is over 40 years old, it's still more than capable of holding its own on the battlefield, thanks to continual modernization and forward-thinking design. This is the insane engineering of the M1 Abrams. The M1 Abrams, upon engine startup, sounds more like a military aircraft getting ready to take off. A terrifying increasing pitch as the engine revs up to speed. The whirring sound emanating from the rotating turbine blades hidden inside. The turbine engine, typically used for jet aircraft, is an engine designed for high-speed operation with minimal weight, a counterintuitive choice for a heavy battle tank. So, why was it chosen? The turbine engine would give the M1 two huge advantages. They are much lighter than an equivalent diesel engine, weighing just 1.1 tons and developing 1,500 brake horsepower. The V12 diesel engine of the Challenger 2 produces 1,200 brake horsepower with 2 tons of metal. This compactness and extreme high power to weight ratio allows the M1 to stack on layers of armour without sacrificing acceleration or top speed. we can plot torque versus shaft speed of the Honeywell AGT1500 turbine engine of the M1 against the V12 MTU-883 of the Challenger 2E, and we can see the turbine has a massive torque advantage at lower shaft speeds. In its lightest configuration, the M1 weighs 61.8 tons. A typical Toyota Corolla weighs 1.1 ton. That's equivalent to 56 Toyota Corollas. Yet, this thing can accelerate from 0 to 32 kilometers per hour in just 7 seconds, with a top speed of 72 kilometers per hour. The M1 Abrams primarily uses diesel fuel, as diesel can act as an additional layer of armor. Liquids are extremely good at absorbing energy from explosions and kinetic energy weapons. They are most effective against shaped charges, and tanks carry a lot of liquid in the form of fuel. It may seem counterintuitive to use fuel as protection from an explosion, but diesel fuel is not very flammable. In fact, if you throw a lit match into a puddle of diesel, it will put the match out. Diesel engines require immense pressure and a sustained flame to ignite. Because of this, diesel can be used with relative safety as armor. However, the turbine engine can also operate on most fuel types. This is a huge advantage in military logistics, making joint operations with NATO vastly easier. In the years following World War II, the Soviets favored diesel compression ignition engines. The Western Allies used a mixture of both gasoline spark ignition and diesel compression ignition. Transporting fuel is one of the largest logistic challenges in war. Needing several types of fuel makes it all the more difficult. The M1 can run on marine diesel, gasoline, or even kerosene if needed, which not only makes it easier to procure fuel in a war zone, but comes with the added bonus of helping the M1 operate in hot or cold weather, dealing with the wild swings in temperature that Ukraine can expect throughout the year with ease. Where diesel fuels can crystallize at low temperatures, kerosene can be used instead. The turbine engine of the M1 works similarly to aircraft engines, with some important differences. Air enters the engine here, where it is compressed by the low-pressure compressor, and then the high-pressure compressor, each individually driven by separate turbine stages. These turbine stages are driven by the combustor, which works a little differently to typical aircraft combustors. It is mounted perpendicularly to the engine and protrudes out of the engine. This makes maintenance access to the combustor easier, with only a simple bolted cover needed to be removed. There are two drive shafts in this engine. A secondary drive shaft driven by the high-pressure turbine, which runs forward to an accessory gearbox that runs things like compressors, electronics, and hydraulics. The main drive shaft, driven by a dedicated power turbine, which is not connected to the compressors, runs rearward to the tank's drive sprockets. This primary drive shaft and its reduction gearbox is surrounded by something called a recuperator. This is the biggest difference between this turbine engine and a typical aircraft jet engine. We don't want the hot exhaust of this engine spewing out like a jet engine. The heat signature this would create would be a giant beacon for heat-guided missiles and give the tank's location away to any enemy using thermal vision. We also don't want to waste all that heat energy. The recuperator is essentially a giant heat exchanger. Air coming from the compressor stage is passed through it, where it is heated by the exhaust before entering the combustion chamber. This lowers the heat signature of the exhaust and increases fuel efficiency, transferring more heat energy back into the engine instead of losing it to the atmosphere. But the M1 Abrams is still a thirsty machine, even by tank standards. The turbine engine uses twice the fuel as a comparable diesel engine per kilometer, where the M1A1 consumes around 4.2 litres per kilometre. While cruising at 40 kilometers per hour, the Leopard 2 consumes 2.2 litres per kilometre. But the US military deemed this issue a cost worth paying for the capabilities the turbine engine provided, allowing the M1 to carry an obscene amount of armour while keeping its acceleration high. The armour installed on the M1 Abrams has evolved and changed over the past 4 decades. The exact details of its thickness, location, materials, and layering is classified for obvious reasons, but there is a great deal known about the science and nature of its armour. It is well publicized that early M1 variants used a type of composite ceramic armor called 𝚃𝙀, which derives much of its ballistic resistance from an extremely hard and light ceramic layer. Hardness in material science is a measure of a material's ability to resist localized deformation, like a scratch. Diamonds are extremely hard, and because of this, industrial diamonds are coated onto cutting tools to help them cut through materials without being eroded themselves. A hard material can scratch and erode a softer material. Hardness can be measured with a Vickers hardness test, which pushes a pyramid-shaped diamond into the material. The hardness is then calculated by dividing the force applied by the resulting surface area of the indentation. The rolled homogeneous armor steel of World War II has a Vickers hardness test of 380. A high carbon steel is about 550, while a ceramic like silicon carbide offers a hardness 5 times greater, up to 2,500, while being much lighter than steel, making it an excellent candidate for armor. But anyone that has dropped a dinner plate knows that ceramics are extremely brittle. They shatter into 1,000,000 pieces with little force. But this can be used to the tank's advantage when combined with a tougher metal backing plate. In this configuration, the ceramic is placed on the outside of the metal plating, acting like an extremely hard outer shell. When a round strikes the armor, the compressive strength and hardness of the ceramic coating causes the round to fracture and break apart. At the same time, the ceramic coating begins to fracture and fragment, spreading the energy of impact across a larger area, which is then absorbed by the tougher metal plate backing the ceramic. Tough in material science means it can absorb a lot of energy without fracturing, the opposite of brittle. Further research and experimentation found ceramic armor performed even better when placed under compression. This can be achieved by simply adding a faceplate and bolting the two pieces together. This changes the dynamics of an impact significantly and helps immensely with resisting attack from long-rod kinetic energy projectiles. These are rounds specifically designed as anti-armor weapons. They are thin, long, dart-like projectiles that require a sabot to launch out of tank barrels. They are typically manufactured from high-density materials like tungsten, with a thin aerodynamic shape and high density. These weapons have an extremely high ballistic coefficient, allowing them to ram into targets at a distance at high velocities. They can obliterate rows of concrete walls with ease. Embedded compressed ceramic armor can defeat these kinetic energy weapons. When the long rod projectile strikes the faceplate, it sends a pressure wave through the ceramic that pulverizes it and increases its volume. This creates what is essentially an abrasive maze of extremely hard and sharp particles the penetrator has to push through, gradually grinding it away. Computer simulations of this effect show that the harder the material, the better. This is the magic of ceramic composite armor. On top of these metal and ceramic layers, there is typically a very dense inner liner called a spall liner. Projectiles don't necessarily need to penetrate every layer of armor to be deadly. If they hit with enough force, the kinetic energy can simply transfer through the material as a wave and cause the material on the inside of the tank to splinter and turn into deadly shrapnel inside the crew compartment. This is called spall. Some munitions are specifically designed to cause this. High explosive squash heads are made from soft plastic explosives that spread out over the armor's surface. With the increased surface area and direct contact with the armor, the explosion transfers a great deal of energy through the material and blows out the armor's backing. This works by sending a compressive shockwave through the material and reflects and rebounds inside the material, creating regions of intense stress that fractures the armor. The spall liner is a ductile and dense material that limits spalling. For early M1s, this layer was typically composed of lead, but beginning in 1988, certain M1A1s began to be upgraded with depleted uranium spall liners, which are even denser than lead, and all new M1A2s were assembled with depleted uranium liners. However, modern composite armor makes it difficult for the shockwave to transmit through the material, and a space layer with an air gap can defeat this squash head munition completely. Additional reactive armor tiles can be added to the outside of the M12. Reactive armor is particularly effective at dealing with shaped charges. Shaped charges consist of a charge shaped with a hollow indentation lined with a ductile metal liner. When the charge is detonated, a pressure wave forms behind the metal liner, deforming it and accelerating the metal into a lance-like stream of particles. The shaped charge effectively creates a hypersonic projectile at point-blank range. It's highly effective at cutting through armor. Reactive armor works by placing an explosive charge between two metal plates. When a jet from a shaped charge strikes the upper plate, it detonates the inner explosive. You may think this could damage the tank, but the tank's lower armor is more than capable of dealing with the relatively blunt pressure formed by the reactive armor detonation. The outer plate then flies outwards to disrupt the incoming jet, while the shockwave formed by the detonation also breaks up the stream of metal approaching the tank. Of course, the best defense is to not be hit at all, and the M1 can create a smokescreen for itself when needed. The M1 has two systems for generating smoke to conceal itself in an engagement. The first involves simply spraying fuel into the engine exhaust, which vaporizes the fuel and creates a large opaque cloud behind the tank. However, it's extremely important that the driver remembers which fuel the tank is running on. This works for diesel fuel, but if gasoline or kerosene is used, it won't conceal the M1, it will set it on fire. The second system uses grenade launchers mounted on the outside of the turret. There are two versions the M1 uses. The 8-canister M257, typically used with the US Marine Corps M1s, and the more widely used 6-can M250. These launchers are controlled from the tank commander's seat here. Pressing one button launches 6 grenades, 3 from the left and 3 from the right. Pressing both buttons launches all 12 of the grenades, launching them about 30 meters from the tank, providing a shrouding curtain of smoke to hide its movements. The engineers of the M1 Abrams did everything in their power to make the M1 as survivable as possible, protecting the crew inside. And the highly trained crew are the most important part of this machine. The M1 Abrams does not have an automatic loader like many modern tanks. It has a dedicated crew member, the loader, to load rounds into the breech. Auto-loaders are a feature of modern Russian tanks. However, the USA have shunned them in their tanks, seeing an auto-loader as an unnecessarily complex mechanism that would impact the M1's reliability, seeing a fourth crew member capable of keeping watch, maintaining the vehicle, and taking over responsibilities in an emergency as an advantage, not a disadvantage. The loader enters the tank through the turret hatch, sitting to the left of the main gun with access to the ammunition box behind them. The gunner to their right is in charge of aiming at targets, using these day and thermal night vision sights, along with a laser range finder to input target distances into the ballistic computer. When instructed by the tank commander sitting behind the gunner, the loader will press a switch with their knee to open a hydraulically actuated armored door behind them. The tank commander will specify the round needed, and the loader will take it out, load it into the breech, close the breech, and move the safe handle into the armed position. This process will be repeated until a ceasefire is called by the tank commander. The armoured ammunition access door is only open when loaded, and this is crucial for the survivability of the M1 Abrams. If a round penetrates the ammunition box, it can result in a lethal detonation of the ammunition stored inside. This armoured door is capable of withstanding this blast, and panels on top of the tank, called blowout panels, are designed to break and allow the pressure and heat to be directed upwards and away from the crew. These rounds are fired out of the M1's 120mm cannon. Early M1s were fitted with a 105mm cannon, 105 referring to the bore diameter of the gun. This decision was made primarily to allow a sharing of ammunition and parts between the 105mm on the previous generation M60 tank. With the development of depleted uranium rounds, it was viewed that this gun was more than adequate to deal with any Soviet armour. However, US allies like Germany did not want to use depleted uranium rounds due to ethical implications, and were moving towards 120mm cannons, with the British Chieftain tank using the Royal Ordnance L11 and the German Leopard 2 using the Rheinmetall RH120. This posed a problem for NATO's goals of standardizing wherever possible to optimize logistics. With ammunition factories across NATO countries producing the same ammunition, this ensured ammunition could not only be shared, but manufactured as close to the front line as possible. The 120mm guns of M1A1 and M1A2 are in fact German Rheinmetall RH120s, manufactured under license in the US. a 5.3 meter long, 3.3 ton smoothbore cannon. This large bulge in the middle of the cannon is designed to evacuate the barrel of propellant gases after each firing. Once the round leaves the barrel, atmospheric pressure can prevent the gases from leaving, and once the breech is opened, potentially harmful and explosive gas enter the crew compartment. The bore evacuator is a pretty simple solution, with holes that allow gases to enter the evacuator as the round passes by. This acts like a pressure reservoir. When a round leaves the barrel with this attachment, the pressure is released from the forward-facing holes at the far end of the evacuator. This pushes the remaining gases outwards. The two primary rounds used by the M1 are the M829 depleted uranium round, which is a sabot kinetic energy round, and the M83081 heat round, which, despite its name, does not use heat as part of its offensive. It uses a kinetic energy shaped charge. We have been piling on weight in this vehicle. The armour, cannon, engine and ammunition makes this an extremely heavy vehicle, weighing between 52 and 68 tons depending on the generation and configuration. The M1 Abrams needed a track and suspension system capable of bearing that weight. For a vehicle this heavy, typical helical springs have some problems. First, their maximum travel is limited. At a particular load, the layers of a helical spring will meet and no further travel is possible, bottoming out and providing an extremely uncomfortable ride for the crew. To deal with a heavier vehicle, we need to increase the spring coil diameter, taking up an increasing amount of space. This was an issue for World War II era tanks, with the M4 Sherman opting to use a volute spring, which is a conical spring that is capable of compressing to a much smaller size as the sheets of spring steel overlap. However, most modern tanks utilize the torsion spring, which take up very little space inside the tank, though they do raise the tank's height considerably. The torsion springs of the M1 are located here, and because they are inside the hull, they raise the hull height by 150 millimeters. The road wheel is attached to a lever which can travel up and down. This lever arm is attached to the torsion bar so that it twists when the lever arm moves up and down. The spring force is derived from the bar's resistance to torsion. Older tanks incorporating torsion bars had limited travel. The M1's predecessor, the M60, had a wheel travel of just 20 centimeters. During the development of the M1, the two tanks were pitted against each other. With the M1 benefiting from 20 years of material science progress, its max travel was nearly double that of the M60 at 38 centimeters. When tested on a track with a series of 30 centimeter bumps at 32 kilometers per hour, the M60 managed to break its front wheels, lost control, and broke the driver's arm. The torsion spring of the M1 runs along the width of the hull, making them quite heavy. We need the torsion spring to be as long as possible because the travel distance is a function of the torsion bar's length. Longer torsion bars can twist more before breaking. An interesting quirk of the torsion spring system is that typical designs, like the M1's, mean that the road wheels cannot be aligned. We cannot connect the lever arms of opposite road wheels to the same torsion spring, as they would frequently travel together, creating no torsion. The far end of the bar needs to be rigidly mounted to the body of the tank in order to develop a spring force. So, two torsion bars need to be mounted alongside each other, creating an offset in distance between the two sides of the tracks. The two sides of the M1 are not symmetrical. This comes with some drawbacks. The leading road wheel will hit bumps first, meaning it will absorb more force than the trailing road wheel, increasing the wear on the leading torsion spring, resulting in more frequent replacements. Torsion bars are very easy to swap out when they aren't broken, but if bent or shattered, or if the body of the tank is bent, it can be difficult to pull the long torsion springs out. Modern tanks are increasingly moving towards hydro-gas suspensions, which look like this. The road wheel has an attached axle pivot arm, which in turn turns a crank and a conrod piston. This piston connects to a hydro-gas suspension cylinder. The first chamber is filled with a fluid, typically oil. The oil is relatively incompressible and so provides marginal spring force. But this chamber has a damper valve that serves to restrict the transfer of fluid between this chamber and the next, which contains a floating piston with a compressed nitrogen gas on the other side. This provides the spring force to ensure the road wheels stay in contact with the ground, but also dampens out vibrations. This system is much smaller, lighter and easier to service than torsion bars, while lowering the height of the tank, lowering its profile and making it harder to hit. Not only that, but each individual suspension can be remotely adjusted by changing the gas pressure inside the cylinder, allowing the tank to take a crouched position if needed. Hydrogas suspensions were considered for the M1 during development, but it was a relatively new technology at the time, and so the torsion spring was chosen. The M1 Abrams has had incremental improvements added over the past 4 decades, with 3 primary variants: the M1, M1A1 and the M1A2, with even more specialized iterations in between, with updated sensors and controls to bring the tank into the 21st century, like the CROZ 2 on the M1A2 SEP, SEP standing for Systems Enhancement Package, which added additional thermal sights for the tank commander, an auxiliary power unit to run its electronics without running the fuel-hungry engine, and the CROZ 2 controller, a remote control sight that allows the tank commander to operate the gun from the safety of the turret. We are currently on the M1A2 SEP V4 variant, and the Army is considering the future of the M1 program, whether that's the M1A2 SEP V5 or a completely new platform. But make no mistake, despite the M1 being one of the longest serving tanks in a modern military, over 4 decades old, it's still highly capable and will be a massive asset to the troops on the ground in Ukraine. The next episode of Real Engineering is about the incredible physics behind magnetic resonance imaging. It will be out on YouTube in 2 weeks, but maybe you want to prepare in advance to better understand what we talk about. MRI machines use a pretty incredible property innate to our body tissues, the quantum spin of hydrogen atoms, and how they interact in different tissue types. It took us a long time to write this script. Understanding quantum mechanics is hard, and quantum physics is becoming increasingly relevant in everyday engineering, from magnetic resonance imaging to quantum computing. Brilliant has 3 courses to get you started with understanding this scientific concept. It's powerful knowledge to obtain, and you can complete a course for free by signing up at brilliant.org/real-engineering. Getting started on your first course is completely free for the first 30 days. But the first 500 people that sign up with our link will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Brilliant makes learning fun and interesting with bite-sized interactive lessons that make it easy to jump in and out of courses, so you can learn in your own time. And it's even easier with their mobile app. So you could learn the fundamentals of computer science on your morning commute to work or school. Brilliant includes interactive elements to help you quickly understand concepts and test your knowledge along the way to ensure you are understanding the concepts you are learning. Brilliant focuses on facilitating effective education that will help you progress in your learning goals, whether it's professional career advancement or just for fun for lifelong learners. Brilliant are adding content monthly, so there's always something new to learn. You can get started for free for the first 30 days by clicking the link on screen right now, and the first 500 people to do so will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription.
Hey Spare Parts Army, I'm your average infantryman Chris Caffey. Earlier this month, for the first time, General Dynamics released brand new footage of their next generation Abrams X that aims to replace the 4-decade-old M1 Abrams tank. But I think a lot of people don't know that many of the Abrams X weapons and concepts originated in seemingly failed weapons programs from the 1980s and 90s. Let's analyze what we know about the new tank's cannon, hybrid electric tree hugger engine, and its electrical systems that sound like Jarvis from Iron Man. Have you ever felt certain you were meant to be fancy royalty? Established Titles offers title packs that give you at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in Eddleston, Scotland, and an official certificate with a crest making you a certified lord or lady. Your certificate features a unique plot number with which you can see the exact location of your land. This is a perfect gift for your friend, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, or family. Established Titles is a fun new way to preserve the natural woodlands of Scotland. They plant a tree with every order and work with global charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts. They're a project based on historic Scottish customs where landowners are referred to as lads or lords and ladies in English. So you can officially change your name to lord or lady. You can put lord stored on your credit card or dating profile. Or there are couple packs that come with adjoining plots of land. The first 200 people purchasing a title pack using my link will be within walking distance next to my plot. Established Titles is running an early Black Friday sale. Plus, if you use code Task and Purpose, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/taskandpurpose to get your gifts now and help support the channel. With everything we've recently learned about modern tanks' vulnerabilities on the battlefield, is this new one really all that different? Much of the Abrams X technology is based on an infamous U.S. Army acquisition program that has its roots in 1999 called the Future Combat Systems. FCS was the Army's most technologically complicated and expensive modernization effort since World War II, with a projected life cycle cost of $200 billion. It promised to field new, lightweight, low-recoil tank cannons and 20-ton unmanned robotic vehicles that were all linked together on the same wireless network. Or, as the Department of Defense would say,
the system of systems will link the power of sensors, command and control, and even unmanned systems to the soldiers and leaders we are growing today.
It's the system of systems. It's the alpha and omega. It's the be-all, end-all of defense programs. In 2009, after blowing through $18 billion, the Future Combat Systems program was finally canceled. No new vehicles, no new systems were successfully acquired. However, we're now seeing many of the seemingly failed ideas from the scrapped Future Combat Systems program are actually getting resurrected. For instance, the General Dynamics Abrams X prototype footage reveals that it's using the XM360 lightweight 120mm cannon with a ported muzzle brake that was originally designed for the FCS program in 2005. It only weighs 4,100 pounds, nearly half the weight of the old 6,800 pound M256 cannon. Bennett Labs developed the cannon at their location in Waterlevitt Arsenal in upstate New York. See, I don't just mispronounce foreign towns. Bennett Labs is the U.S. Army's primary design, development, engineering, and production facility for large caliber armament systems since 1887, when the arsenal was founded. The National Defense Industrial Association published a document detailing the unique aspects of the XM360 cannon. The XM360's muzzle brake reduces recoil by relieving some of the built-up pressures and has a blast deflector to minimize overpressure felt near the cannon. The weapon's sensor electronically integrates with the tank's diagnostic system, giving crew a live readout of its health. Glad I got out of the Army before they started trying to put electronic microchips inside me to monitor my health. The Abrams X uses an unmanned turret that automatically loads the ammunition itself with a carousel system. The advantage here is that it lowers the system's weight by a lot because the turret can be smaller and requires less heavy armor protection since there are no crew located inside of it. So you might be wondering right now, if the Abrams X has an autoloader, does that mean that these tanks will detonate their ammo like the Soviet-era T-72?
Sharpen your pencil.
Right. And I go through hundreds of pages of calculations. This is
Storm Shadow cruise missiles that the UK has
105, referring to the Systems Enhancement Package, which added additional thermal sights.
Someone's shooting at something over there. There's a lot of artillery fire over there. There is a very, very intense artillery battle going on around Bakhmut today.
Finally, Vladimir Putin was able to declare victory in Bakhmut, but it may yet prove a hollow one. By the end of April, the Ukrainians held only a few apartment buildings at the top of the slope on the very western edge of town, and it looked like defeat was inevitable. Until on May the 9th, the unthinkable happened. Suddenly, backed by a massive artillery barrage, Ukrainian infantry and tanks assaulted the Russian flanks to the north and south of the town. In a matter of hours, they'd retaken hundreds of meters, in some places over a kilometer, that it had taken months for the Russians to capture. It was a reversal so unexpected that it shocked some Ukrainians as much as the Russians. But inside the city, Wagner continued to advance. Within days, the roads had been cleared, the remaining Ukrainians were able to withdraw, and that meant that the Russians could advance. It took Russia 9 months to capture Bakhmut. town. I asked him to sum up the situation in a couple of words, and he said, stably when the war broke out in February last year, Bakhmut was not on the front line, but it was a pretty important Ukrainian staging post because you had several front lines within about 20 miles of that. At the beginning of this battle, and actually quite a long way into it, the Ukrainians were quite puzzled about why the Russians were so obsessed with this place. It is a fairly big town, as Donetsk region towns go. If you want to conquer Donetsk region, it is, I suppose, a logical place to start because it's one of the main towns that's still under Ukrainian control. But it's not a strategic linchpin. It doesn't control some kind of gateway that's going to cause a Ukrainian collapse. And yet the Russians kept on sending troops towards it, even though they weren't making much progress. Bakhmut was playing quite an important kind of logistical role for the Ukrainians when the Battle of Donbass began in the spring of 2022. August 1st is generally thought of as the beginning of the Battle of Bakhmut. The Russians managed to approach the eastern outskirts of the city, but they got held up there. They tried to get across the Bakhmutska River, that's the river of the same name it's on, south of the town, but they got held up there. So the Russians, quite sensibly, tried to go around the side. You essentially had a battlefront which was much bigger than Bakhmut itself. We're talking about a battlefield that really stretched about 16 miles, 8 miles either side of the city itself. And of course the offensive was, from the beginning, led by Wagner, the mercenary company led by 𝚃𝙷𝙰𝚃𝚃. So a lot of people speculating, well, maybe these guys are being paid per metre taken. But as the battle went on, as it absorbed more and more men and more effort from both sides, Bakhmut took on a totemic status really far in excess of its actual strategic value. It's quite clear that this battle isn't really about Bakhmut itself. This battle is about bleeding the other side. By autumn, this has become First World War style battle of attrition. It's already drawing comparisons with the Battle of Verdun. The lines are basically static. The Russians are on the edge of the city, but they can't really get in. Sometimes they take some ground, the Ukrainians push them back. Both sides are hurling artillery around. And inside the city, things are just getting destroyed. And this is when Telegraph was able to access Bakhmut. We had to wait until quite bad weather, so low cloud, because that's when the drones start to fly, you're a bit safer from artillery. The situation was already absolutely dire. I mean, no running water, no electricity, no heating. The civilians who were there were basically trying to survive in basements. Some of them were still stubbornly staying in their flats, in high-rise apartment blocks. This was about the time that the Russians started a general campaign across the country of targeting energy infrastructure, because they were trying to freeze the country into submission. This was already an urban battle, quite a brutal urban battle, in which, I mean, there is no way the Russians didn't know there were still civilians in the town. At the very end of December, they seem to have made a decision, we're just going to try and go around the side. So on December 27th, they began a very big assault suddenly on 𝚃𝙷𝙰, not on Bakhmut itself, on the other satellite town about 8 miles up the road. That battle lasted about 2 weeks. It was incredibly bloody. It was led by the Wagner military group, and the way they took it is basically with human raid attacks. So they were getting guys recruited from prison, quite poorly trained, who were basically treated as cannon fodder, saying if you retreat, we're going to kill you anyway. So your only chance of survival is to charge at the Ukrainian lines, hope you get there. If you talk to Ukrainian soldiers who fought in 𝚃𝙷𝙰, they talk about, firing their rifles until they're too hot to handle, and running short of ammunition because they've killed so many guys, but there's still guys coming in. And when you run out of ammo, you're in trouble. And over time, despite the massive casualties the Russians took in the Battle of 𝚃𝙷𝙰, they managed to inch forward. And by the middle of the month, the Ukrainians have admitted that they've abandoned that town. Now, on its own, losing 𝚃𝙷𝙰 might not have been fatal for Bakhmut, but at around about the same time, there was another offensive on the southern side of that long front line, and they pushed up, again, not at Bakhmut itself, but they were heading towards the main highway behind it, the highway connecting Bakhmut with the town called Konstantinovka. That was the main supply line for the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians managed to stop that offensive, but only within about a kilometre or two of the road. They pushed them back a little bit, but not that far. So that road was suddenly under fire, under direct fire. Is now at the point where, Ukrainian drivers are saying, yeah, you can still drive that road, but you've got to go at maximum speed the whole way. At the end of January, Ukrainians have pushed back the attempt to cut the Konstantinovka road, but the Konstantinovka road is now under fire. The 𝚃𝙷𝙰𝚃𝙁 road is under artillery fire, and it's pretty clear the Ukrainian position is much, much more precarious. That's when I and Julian Simmons, the Telegraph photographer, showed up in the area, and I must say the atmosphere, the kind of rumours flying around amongst soldiers and volunteers and civilians and so on was all kind of pointed towards this sense that we're going to have to give up the city sometime soon. The atmosphere is really, really quite tense. Just spoken to the mayor, his account, asked him to sum up the situation in a couple of words, and he said, stably. It was getting too vulnerable. It was just getting too precarious. The last thing they want is to have an army surrounded and then slowly destroyed. That would be a massive disaster, not only because you lose a bunch of guys, but just the impact on morale would be catastrophic. Early February, I'm standing there in 𝚃𝙷𝙰𝚃𝙁, a few miles from Bakhmut, listening to the artillery battle, watching the helicopters very close by come up, fire their rockets, trying to hold back that attempt to cut that road, thinking this is not going to last long. The Ukrainians are going to have to pull back. I've seen a few retreats in my time. You kind of get this sense about when an army is going to have to pull back, and I thought I was feeling it then, but they hold on. Early March, you've got Lieutenant Prigozhin of Wagner is standing on top of the rooftop in Bakhmut, claiming that he's basically surrounded, claiming that if Zelensky doesn't order these Ukrainian troops to surrender, that they're all doomed. I mean, as the battle wore on, it became to have almost more totemic political value than it did strategic value. Like Yevgeny Prigozhin viewed it not so much, or not only as a battle against the Ukrainians, but also as a battle against the Russian Ministry of Defense. And there were certain points where it almost looked like he was more concerned about putting one over on Sergei Shoigu, then sort of Volodymyr Gerasimov, chief of the General Staff, than he was about defeating the Ukrainians. And during the Battle of Soledar, he began putting out a remarkable series of press releases talking about how the army had nothing to do with this, how this was all PMC Wagner. Towards the end of the battle, he was saying that his representatives had been frozen out of planning meetings. So Bakhmut is going to go down in history not just as a battle between the Ukrainians and the Russians, but it's also going to become emblematic of this massive problem the Russians have, which is this lack of unity of command, the way that individual rival fiefdoms, used to call them towers of the Kremlin, rival towers of the Kremlin, are pulling in different directions. And that, I think, in the long term, may prove the downfall, or one of the downfalls of the Russian war. So the fall of Bakhmut is not actually a massive strategic blow. Behind it, there is a really formidable highland. These quite high hills, not local valleys, and the Ukrainians have been digging in and preparing extra lines there for months. It was basically a fortress. So all the Russians have done is they've captured Bakhmut. Now they've got their next natural fortress. They're going to have to slog through if they want to try and get into the next valley, which is where the real prize is, the city of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk and Uzbekistan and Konstantinovka. Bakhmut was certainly the longest battle of this war. It's longer than most battles in World War I. It's certainly the longest battle for a single city that Russia or Ukraine has fought since the Second World War. Now it's over. Is it really going to change the course of the war? I think it's one of those battles where the results are going to show up for months and years to come, and not necessarily around Bakhmut. The results of this are about attrition. It's about how many men were lost, how much ammunition was lost, how many resources were poured into that battle by both sides that could have been better used elsewhere. The war of movement is likely to resume elsewhere on the front, but when historians write the history of the war in Ukraine, that will be a very important chapter.
one of Ukraine's most decorated brigades in a daily battle to hold back Russia on the Eastern Front. For the 1st Tank Brigade, it's the fight of their lives. Under constant attack from air and ground. They gave us unprecedented access to their front lines. While they fight to keep Russia out from a town under constant attack. The bombing is relentless. Shallow trenches offer the barest of protection from Russian fire.
Come on, this way. Down. Get in, get down.
We follow closely in their daily life and death struggle to halt their enemy. Outgunned and outmanned, they refuse to give ground. They are the defenders of Donbass. First light on the Eastern Front. And the opening battle of the day for Ukrainian forces heading forward is with the mud. War has left Donbass ploughed and churned. This is their 2nd spring since Russia invaded, their 2nd season of muck and misery, and their 2nd year in their struggle to keep their country free. Ukraine's Eastern Front stretches for nearly 1,000 kilometres, mostly across the Luhansk and Donetsk regions that make up Donbass. Capturing here is now Russia's principal war aim. We met up with Ukraine's 1st Tank Brigade on the Zero Line, just outside 𝚃𝙷𝙰𝚃𝚃. Few know how to handle this heavily contested ground better than them. With aged armour, the battle-hardened crew get ready to fuel up and face their foe. It's familiar territory. They've been fighting Russia in one form or another in Donbass for 8 years. But the threat hangs heavier now. Their enemy is close by, and Ukraine's forces are outmanned and outgunned. Still, they show no fear.
Ці машини великі і страшні, але попри те, що й дуже старі. І вони ламаються. От найбільше лякає те, щоб машина не підвела десь там. Бо такі випадки бувають. Машина перестає стріляти, в крайніх випадках перестає їхати. Оце найгірше. А так, танкісти – це як старший брат піхоти. Піхоту обіжають, танкісти виїжджають. Проблема в тому, що ми...
Start 6.
But does Russia...
Narrator dialogue. Skip for now. Button. Alt+S. New natural. Exiting narrator.
And this is a well-worn routine for Tank Commander Serhiy. First he faced Russian separatists in Donbass, and now it's the Russian army. Since the invasion, he's only had a week away from his tank and crew. His brigade is one of the most decorated in the Ukrainian army. Today they're out to hit Russian observation posts near their lines. The tanks may be old, but they've barely given the Russians an inch of territory here. It's a fast game of cat and mouse, life or death. And it's left as deep an imprint on the landscape as it has on the men. The shell craters stretch for miles. And Serhiy and his crew are soon in the thick of it. They found their target across the next field, over 500 metres away. And they unleash everything they've got. Watch as Serhiy's rounds hit top right. Seconds later, they lay down a smokescreen. The orders are get in, get out, and take cover. Before Russian guns can start working on their positions. A response is expected, so it's time to move. And to seek cover wherever it can be found. These fierce battles happen daily and have created a wasteland. Go!
They're abandoning the fight. We've won this.
Drone, quickly! It could be a reconnaissance drone or armed. They don't wait to find out.
Go to position. Go quickly. Go quickly.
Open ground is their enemy's friend.
Я ж говорю.
Радіостанції передали, що наш танк вдало відпрацював по ворожим позиціям. Будуть ловити огнем вражеської артилерії. Тому зараз чекаємо, витримуємо час, щоб самим не потрапити під цей артилерійський обстріл. Зараз прилетіла 120-та міна. Прям десь метрів 20-30 від нас.
Якраз ще один вихід з часу на Нектарин.
Радійка доложила, що по нам вихід був. Чекаємо. З Божою поміччю перечекаємо, і все буде добре.
And the tank brigade doesn't just have tanks at its disposal. They're using everything they've got to defend the town of 𝙿𝙷𝙰𝚃𝙴. The reminders of lives once lived here are scattered everywhere. But the rubble of the town is now as much of a front line as the trenches. This was the local kindergarten. It's now the temporary base for the brigade's armed drone team. They're a small light unit constantly on the move, climbing and crawling their way through the town's ruin. Always on the lookout for the closest position to the Russians to launch an attack. These off-the-shelf drones are armed with a grenade and sent into flight. Unlike the tanks, they're on the hunt for smaller targets. At the town's edge, a trench comes into their crosshairs. It's a direct hit. Russian vehicles are next. It's deadly effective. But their enemy is using these same tactics. War now occupies every inch of 𝙿𝙷𝙰𝚃𝙴. And months of Russian bombardments are tearing apart what's left, piece by piece. Its people have mostly fled. The pets they have left behind, driven wild by Russian shelling. At a secret location, we head to a mobile command post. To meet the man charged with holding the town.
Your men have seen some really hard fighting. As a leader, how do you keep your men motivated?
Як можна мотивувати солдата, який так захищає свою жінку, своїх дітей, свою землю? Чим його ще можна мотивувати? Нас, скажімо так, не потрібно мотивувати, тому що нас мотивували росіяни самі. Путін мотивує краще.
This is what a year of Russian shelling does to a town. War's burden is crushing, and for most of the people who lived here, it was too much to bear.
Russian shelling has blown the life out of this place. And along 600 miles of the Eastern Front, the Ukrainian army is absorbing Russia's blows. But its enemy isn't just targeting soldiers, it's targeting towns and villages, it's targeting civilians. Now, 𝚃𝙷𝙰𝚃𝙁, where we are now, there's nothing special. The people who lived here are very proud of their new school. They sent their kids to the local kindergarten.
The streets still have traces of a thriving town that once existed here. But few dare linger out in the open. As abandoned as it is, Russian bombs still fall here. A mortar lands to the left of our car.
Зруйновано собі течко, і тут жило раніше 10 тисяч людей, зараз живе 200 людей, і він військовий. І ви бачите, обстріли постійно, і обстріли просто попадають всюди, куди можуть попадати. В бомбосховищі чувствують себе в відносній безпеці. Раніше там було 100 людей, зараз там приблизно 40. В них появився лідер, бувша вчителька фортепіано, яка вчила дітей. Тепер піклується про літніх людей, які проживають в цій школі.
It's dangerous to spend too much time above ground here, but we risk the school run. Rubble-strewn streets have become bombers' alleys. Much of the town is within range of Russian guns. Another mortar lands, even closer. They're zeroing in. Any movement here captures Russian attention, so speed matters. Out here in the open, a moment's hesitation can prove fatal. So we move fast in search of cover. The school lies broken and forlorn. The last children were removed a few months ago. But the piano teacher clings on. Across empty playgrounds and through silent hallways, her music echoes. Russia has shattered her town. It has dulled and deadened her piano. But it hasn't broken Irina Babkina. The memories of the town that she loved and the children that she taught keep her here, despite the hardship.
Здесь музыки нет, только звуки снаряда. Разбито, инструменты испорчены. Ну ничего, мы все восстановим. И опять зазвучит музыка и детский смех.
Irina takes us to one of the town's remaining shelters.
Oh, it's very cold.
The conflict raging above has driven them down here. In the darkness, they've made their home. They can survive, but it's a place of emptiness and sadness. And almost unseen, in a far-off corner, a woman sits alone and bereft.
What was life like here before?
Хорошо, очень хорошо. В нашем районе было все хорошо. Сейчас все розвалили, все попалили. Мужа вбили.
Can you tell us what happened to your husband?
Что рассказывать? Прожили 54 года вместе. 74 года. Работала, все нормально. Уже на пенсии. Вийшов. Снаряд вилетів до сусідки. Він вийшов посмотреть, і осколком вбили. Поранили. Кровью стек за ночь. Я была здесь, он дома был. Пришла вот он. Его нет, лежит мертвый. Похоронили. Что можно сказать?
We head back out in the fading light. Slowing only for broken bridges, Russian guns are still within range, and barricades and tank traps along the road. And we arrive at war's familiar stricken landscape. Here, Russian eyes are always watching.
I'm here. Don't move.
The torn limbs of trees, a reminder of the reach of Russian artillery and grenade fire. We're heading to Zero Line, the closest trenches to the Russian positions. Brigade Infantryman Dima, he's just 22 years old, is escorting us forward. Mortars, tank fires, grads, they get hit by everything here.
It's time to push up.
Dima's just told me the village over here is half held by the Ukrainians and half held by the Russians.
We're told to tread carefully. Landmines litter the ground. And they're not the only danger. As we move closer, Russian fire begins to fly overhead. It's time to head for cover. Even the shallowest trenches will do. But the team is split up after the first strike, and some of us are left exposed out in the open.
О! Можем идти. О!
That shell hits just a few meters away. Dima and my colleague Darren Conway call us towards the trench.
Давай сюда ко мне, бегом.
Come here, Luba, here. Luba, fast, fast, fast. Come on. Let's get to that trench. Quick.
Stu, there's a bunker here. Q.
This way. Come on, run, run, run. Straight to me.
Давай, давай.
Come on. This way.